I often, if not daily, analyze my experiences with different brands I interact with. The better interaction and experience I have with a product or service, the higher the likelihood I use them again or recommend them to friends and family. Optimizing for quality of user experience is also the key to the long-term success of a website. Our next presenters are from Google. Google provides a number of tools to measure and report on a site's performance. In this session, you'll learn how to use Core Web Vitals to help you quantify the experience of your site and identify opportunities to improve. I'm excited to introduce Katherine Rudik and Sal Denaro. Katherine leads strategic web partner development efforts at Google's Global Product Partnerships team, and Sal joined Google in 2018 as a Senior Technical Solutions Consultant. Please welcome Katherine and Sal. Using Core Web Vitals to build an efficient UI starts now.
Hi, I'm Sal Denaro. I'm a web ecosystem consultant at Google. I help various clients of Google improve their overall web experience. One of the tools I use is Core Web Vitals. So let's talk about the difference between your users' expectations and the expectations of your developers and your other stakeholders. Well, your users expect to get the content that they're interested in, to get it very quickly, and for it to be a smooth experience, which is very natural and interactive. Well, your stakeholders have other expectations. Well, they want to make sure that the ads get presented, the analytics get collected, that all of the dynamic portions are rendered correctly, that you have the latest information. And of course, there's an overlay with some kind of a coupon code or some kind of other call to action. Sometimes this is a conflict between these two. And we want to help you guys make good choices so you can balance out these two levels of expectations. So think about what your users want. They want to make sure that when they request something that it loads very, very quickly. They have a sense of when it's happening. They also want to make sure that it responds naturally to their interactions. And more importantly, that the layout feels smooth, polished, not janky, jittery, changing under their fingertips. So we came up with a couple of metrics to figure out a way to quantify this in a way that makes sense. So the first is largest contentful paint. The second is the first input delay. The last is the cumulative layout shift. Each one of these corresponds to one of your users' expectations, right? That things are loaded very quickly, that they feel natural, interact, and more importantly, that the layout is smooth and stable. So we're going to go talk about each one of these in detail. So what makes for a good LCP? Well, ideally, it's under 2.5 seconds. And when you talk about largest contentful paint, you're talking about the bulk of the text of the article, the hero image, the thing that the users went to that page for. When we talk about first input delay, we're talking about a runtime metric that corresponds to the user's actual actions on the page. This changes from user to user based on a whole set of circumstances. And when we talk about cumulative layout shift, all of the little changes that happen on the page load that change the overall layout of the page. So we're going to go into each one of these in detail. So think about when a user is loading that page. They've gone there for an article, a recipe, for an image. They want to make sure that the bulk of the content is loaded within that 2.5 second window. And more importantly, we talk about the largest chunk for that particular viewport as being the largest contentful paint. It's not enough just to load the banner quickly or the ad slot, but to load what the user requested. What leads to a bad LCP? Well, of course, it should be no surprise that having a badly configured server affects it. Likewise, render blocking JavaScript, badly formed CSS, having resources which load very slowly, either through a CDN is not configured optimally, or resources which are too large, ill-sized, and more importantly, client-side rendering. When you use client-side rendering, often you're loading the entire content of the page and then reformatting it when it reaches the user. And this leads to sometimes not such a great experience. The first input delay. Well, this again is a runtime metric, as I said before. So it changes based on the speed of the connection, the user's device, how he's going to interact with the page. Everyone's first input delay is just a little different. So what are the things that affect FID? Long-running tasks, which should not surprise anyone. JavaScript, again, should not be surprising anyone. large JavaScript bundles. This can cause a serious significant slowdown input delay as, again, the entire page is blocked up while it's loading all and compiling all that JavaScript. More importantly, render blocking JavaScript. CLS. Everyone's had the experience of loading a page where everything reformats under your fingers as you're trying to read it. This can be very frustrating to your users. Your users are generally not happy having to go and try to figure out where those buttons are, where the text is. So in general, you want a CLS of under 0.1. That is ideal. The better it is, the more stable it is, the better it is for your user experience. So what affects this? Well, images without dimensions is a big culprit. I'm sure everybody has moved to putting all of their image information to CSS rather than hard coding it within the image itself. That turns out to not necessarily be the best way. Having the image size known in advance means that the layout is relatively static. Likewise, adds, embeds, iframes without dimensions, those again, they can affect overall CLS. Having adds expand or contract or change or shift under your fingers leads to a very jittery, janky experience. Dynamically injected content is another cause for bad CLS. I think everybody's worked with third-party content providers that go and provide information after you load a large JavaScript bundle, after you believe that the page has already been loaded. And of course, web fonts. Everybody loves fonts. Everybody loves to pick the fonts that they love. But whenever you can, make sure that the font is loaded before the text is displayed so you don't end up reformatting all your text. So everybody's familiar with a lot of other metrics. Some of these have fallen out of practice, but I think all of these are somewhat useful. They're just not core web vitals. Time to first byte is a really good indication of your connection speed. It is not a very user-centric metric. First contentful paint, again, it is quite useful, but your users didn't go there for the banner or the banner ad. They came there for a large chunk of content that they expect to be reading. Time to interactive is, again, a very useful metric. It's not necessarily the most user-centric metric. Again, if you have a page with lots of lazy loading content, you might actually have a bad TTI, but in general, the experience feels quite good for the user. Speed index is an incredibly useful metric if you're developing a browser. But if you're not actually developing a browser, but instead are focused on the user's experience, the page, speed index is not necessarily the best metric. Again, feel free to use them, but use them for what they actually do. So how do you improve your core vitals? Well, these are my 3 don'ts. Never send pixels that will not be displayed. Don't send bytes that are not going to be executed. And don't send content the user is not requesting. If you follow these guidelines, you can pretty much ignore everything else I had to tell you today. These 3 things itself, again, point towards lazy loading, making things static, providing the images information within the actual HTML. Whenever possible, use native lazy loading. You can always use a fallback to use a third-party lazy loading library. Whenever possible, view synchronous JavaScript to be a bug. Use asynchronous JavaScript. Avoid synchronous JavaScript. Synchronous JavaScript can always be blocking. There's always a trade-off here between inlining your JavaScript synchronously and loading external libraries. You should make those trade-offs based on the user's overall experience. And finally, use Pagespeed Insights and other performance tools for auditing advice. Don't just fly blindly. Actually look for the advice that can help you move towards a better experience. For images, whenever possible, make them smaller. Use source sets. Use responsive images. You can compress them using optimizers like Squish. Prefer native lazy loading and use formats like avif. If you follow this advice, you should be able to have smaller images that load much, much faster. So what does it look like to have a fallback from native to third-party lazy loading? Well, this is an example pulled right out of a WordPress 5.5 theme. Whenever possible, use a native lazy loading. If that is not available, then you can just go and yank in a third-party library that will provide it for you. When using third-party resources, less is more. Don't include everything on all pages. Load them later using async and deferred. Often you have to ask yourself, do I need that 41K jQuery bundle just to save 20 lines of code? I'm guilty of this too. Everybody knows jQuery. jQuery is probably one of the most used libraries out there on the web. A lot of times it actually makes sense to just go and write 40, 50 lines of JavaScript to avoid that 41K bundle. Whenever possible, separate critical from non-critical CSS. The critical CSS should be loaded above the fold to make sure that your layout is stable, to make sure that everything is as static as possible. And then the final bundle of CSS can be loaded lower on the page to fill in all the little details that you need. Third-party libraries are not free. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking third-party libraries are like Pokemon. You're supposed to catch them all and put them into your page. That's not what you want to do. They all have trade-offs. The example I always give is on jQuery. Everybody loves jQuery. That 41K library, the trade-off is whether it actually saves you enough coding time to actually make sense that you could actually include it on your page. Whenever possible, prefer asynchronous to synchronous JavaScript. There are other tricks you can do to speed things up a bit. One is pre-connection, one is DNS lookup. There's a lot of tricks there to go and help you get those libraries faster, but none of them improve the speed. It's just simply not using them when you don't need them. Later on, I'm going to go and explain a trick to go find libraries that you might not actually be using. In closing, whenever possible, insert content carefully. You want to make sure that when you're loading anything that it's not going to go and reformat your page. It's not going to go and make the bad experience for the user. Make sure that feedback is instantaneous. Make sure that the visuals actually match reality. Don't paint a button that is not going to respond to a user click. Don't provide any way of interacting with content that is not quite ready to be interacted with. And we're going to talk about measuring user experience. I think a lot of people are familiar with BMI. BMI is an interesting metric. It turns out that I and a professional weightlifter might have the same BMI. That does not necessarily mean that we're equivalent. It's a number. Numbers require context. They are not magic. So when we look at these metrics, we have to understand what exactly are we measuring and figure a way to put that into context. So I'm going to go and explain some information about how to put these in context. I like to think in terms of a three-legged stool. We have RUM data, lab data, and best practices information. You need all three to be able to go and create that experience that you want to provide to your users. So what happens if you use RUM data and lab data without best practices? Well, you're kind of guessing your way through. You're working by coincidence rather than by intent. What happens if you use lab data and best practices data without runtime data? Well, you're creating a page that works in theory, but not necessarily in practice. So we all know in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So what happens if you're using RUM data and best practices without lab data? Well, in many cases, you're actually optimizing for Chrome and not for the user. Again, Chrome is not your user is your user, and you happen to be using Chrome. So there's a whole collection of different tools that provide you with this information. One thing you might notice is that neither Chrome DevTools nor Lighthouse provide you with FID. Again, these are runtime user metrics. These are not metrics that are provided from Chrome or from the Lighthouse. They're instead collected from all of the different users that are actually interacting with that app. Whenever possible, start with Pagespeed Insights. My colleague is going to provide a whole bunch of information on Pagespeed Insights, but each of these tools provides something valuable to you. What you'd like to do is create a feedback loop where each of these individual tools provide you with something that improves your user experience over time. You want to have dashboards that collect the data. You want to be able to do audits. You want to be able to go and run Pagespeed Insights and get information. You want to go and find both runtime and lab data. And you want to be able to make all of these changes and see them reflected in overall improvement. Whenever possible, your goal is not necessarily to get 100 in Lighthouse. If anybody has ever played Mario Brothers knows, the princess is always in another castle. Your goal is to go and make useful changes and see them reflected in better scores and better Core Web Vital scores. Now I'd like to hand things over to my colleague, Katherine. She's going to be talking about all of the different tools we can use to go and gather Core Web Vital information, as well as other metrics that can be useful in helping improve your experience to your users. In addition, she's going to be mentioning some things about Scikit. Scikit is an excellent tool for all of the GoDaddy customers out there using WordPress.
Thanks, Sal, and hi, everyone. My name is Katherine, and I'm a Strategic Web Partner Manager at Google. I'm very excited to see all of you here at this GoDaddy Pro event today. And after Sal has introduced the Core Web Vitals for measuring website performance, I will be taking you on a journey of how to measure these metrics specifically for your website. But first, let's take a step back and look at two conceptually different categories of data that we will be using to understand website performance. The first category is called lab data. It provides insights into how potential users will likely experience your web page, and this offers a wide variety of possibilities for debugging. The second category is called field data. This data shows how real users are experiencing your website in the wild, in the real world when they're loading it. This type of measurement is also sometimes called real user monitoring or RUM, so keep that in mind when you hear the names and know that they can be used interchangeably. Tools that collect lab data work in a controlled testing environment with predefined devices and predefined network conditions. In a way, this is a way to measure how the website performs in an ideal test. This type of measurement has a couple of key advantages. The first one being is that the results that you get, you can easily reproduce. And the second one being is that you can reproduce them immediately. So you can test a lot of different conditions in the lab, see how your website is going to be performing for different users, for different browser types, connections, devices, etc. You will be using lab data to track down bugs and identify, isolate, and fix major performance issues. On the other hand, we have field data, or RUM, real user monitoring. It measures what real-world users are experiencing in the wild when loading your website. This data is collected from real page loads on actual user devices and their real-world internet connection. And you know that the real world is messy, with a wide variety of devices, network configurations, cache conditions, and the list really goes on. So collecting and analyzing this type of data will let you understand what's actually happening in the real world, and it will also help you determine the conditions that are important to later test out and simulate in the lab. You should be measuring both lab and field data to understand the full picture of your website's performance. And this is really important to remember. At Google, we say that you prepare in the lab to see results in the field. For example, two of the core vital metrics that Sal has been talking about, LCP, or largest contentful paint, and CLS, cumulative layout shift, are measured both in the lab and in the field, so as lab data and as field data. I'd like to move on to specific tools, but first, let me debunk 3 common myths about performance. The first myth has to do with how performance is measured. So a good user experience cannot be captured in a single point of time. It's not something static. It's made up of milestones in your user's journey as they travel through your website, open page by page, and see what's on it. To understand what your users experience in each milestone, you have to understand the different metrics that are out there. And there's a lot of them. There's not only one. So a great first step to start is to begin measuring core web vitals, the essential 3 metrics Sal has talked about. And then as you get familiar with them, as you get familiar with measuring performance altogether, move on to more advanced metrics and incorporate that into how you measure your site and how you analyze your site and what changes you make. The second myth has to do with conditions. There really is no such thing as an absolutely fast website or an absolutely representative user. The way your site is loading is highly variable from user to user, from device to device, and it depends on internet connection. So calibrate your lab environment to test a variety of conditions and see how your site would perform for different conditions. You can use field data to actually identify the test parameters for the lab. For example, mobile versus desktop and 3G versus 4G, or different browsers. And the last myth has to do with the performance results that you're seeing. If your website loads fast for you, this does not mean that it will load fast for your user. Actually, on the contrary, in most situations, the settings that you as a developer will be using to test out performance will probably be much faster than what your users are experiencing in the real world. So rely on field data to understand the devices and networks your users are on and simulate these conditions, mirror these conditions in the lab when testing. Now, let's get to know 3 types of users to understand how site metrics and the tools that are available for measuring them can help them. Lexi is a freelance website developer. She is focused on technical details, troubleshooting, and improving performance of her website. Tarani is a business owner, always on the lookout for insights of how customers interact with her website and to understand how great performance can grow sales and impact business growth. And Steve is the website designer, and he is on a mission to build and monitor amazing user experience on the web and outside of it. So let's see which tools Lexi, Harani, and Steve will choose to find performance insights that are relevant specifically for them, and follow their examples. So the first tool that I want to talk about really combines the best of both worlds, and it's called Pagespeed Insights. This is a great place to start for Lexi, Harani, and Steve to get familiar with performance and to generate reports both on lab data and field data for mobile and desktop devices. When you insert a URL into Pagespeed Insights, the tool will provide a field data overview of how real-world users experience the page. This data is uploaded from the Chrome User Experience Report, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the important part to remember here is that this tool, Pagespeed Insights, provides you field data. And at the same time, it provides you lab data. So based on lab data that it uploads from Lighthouse, another tool we'll touch upon next, it generates a performance score to evaluate your website. The best part about Pagespeed Insights is that it gives Lexi, Harani, and Steve a set of actionable recommendations on how to improve experience for each page. Right away, they can see if pages meet core web vitals and best practices to fix any problems. Now, let's move on to our next tool. I think Lighthouse is a brand that a lot of you may be familiar with and maybe even have tried out. This is a lab data tool, and you can use it to audit performance as well as accessibility, progressive web apps, SEO, and more. Lexi, our website developer, and Steve, our website designer, find Lighthouse really helpful to diagnose and optimize locally in their development environment before testing any of the new features live on real users. So this is a great tool to test everything out right here in your development environment before shipping anything live to the real world. Lighthouse is broadly available in different UIs, so really choose the workflow that works best for you and suits you best. For example, Lighthouse powers the Audits panel in Chrome DevTools. Open this panel on a website you want to audit and receive a detailed performance report in less than 1 minute. To make audits even easier, you can run Lighthouse either on the Pagespeed Insights website or in the Lighthouse Viewer, which is a dedicated web page to view and share reports online. And if you want to automate your Lighthouse runs via shell script, I recommend that you install the Node command line tool. And another handy option is running Lighthouse programmatically as a Node module. So as you can see, Lighthouse is available in completely different UIs. So check out the link that I've shared on the first slide about Lighthouse to see all that are available. I've actually listed even not all of them. And look around and choose the ones that work best for you. Our next tool is really important for Harani, who is a business owner, and she wants to understand what actual users are experiencing when they visit her website. The Chrome User Experience Report, or CRUX, as it's sometimes called, is a public database of UX field data of millions of websites. It is regularly updated and collected from opted-in real Chrome users. Harani uses and looks at the raw data that is publicly available in the BigQuery dataset. And she can analyze her website as well as see insights and information and raw data on other websites, millions of websites available on the web, her competitors included. She can also use the Chrome User Experience Dashboard to visualize these insights, easily monitor performance changes, and core vital distributions over time. She can use that to compare these data to business growth and to business data that she tracks separately. So also, I'm leaving the links here for you to explore both the BigQuery dataset and the dashboard that is publicly available and for you to use and to analyze data. Our next tool is Search Console, and it is another tool that Harani, our website owner, checks on a daily basis. Inside this tool, Harani visits the Core Web Vitals report, which is pulled from the Chrome User Experience Report and shows field data. It allows her to see across the entire site and identify groups of pages that require attention. So this is actually the key advantage of Search Console, and specifically the Core Web Vitals report in Search Console compared to other tools, is that it lets you analyze the whole website and identify groups of pages that need additional attention. Once these pages are identified, Tarani can run these pages through Pagespeed Insights and learn about the specific optimization suggestions that the tool gives her. Let's see which tool Lexi, our website developer, likes to use for auditing web pages very closely. Chrome DevTools are built directly into any Chrome browser and can help Lexi diagnose problems quickly. They help her understand every technical detail about the pages she audits. You can follow Lexi's example and open Chrome DevTools in your browser right now to generate more technical performance reports that include Core Web Vitals and a lot more details. For example, the Chrome DevTools Performance panel has a new Experience section that can help detect unexpected layout shifts. This will be helpful for finding and fixing visual instability on your page. And finally, in order to have a handy real-time data report for any page they visit, Lexi, Tarani, and Steve installed the Web Vitals Chrome extension. It's just helpful for catching issues early on in the development workflow. You can easily install the extension from Chrome Web Store and see the Core Web Vitals for any page that you visit on the web. We talked about 6 different tools to see lab data and publicly collected field data. And I invite you to follow Lexi's, Tarani's, and Steve's example to choose the ones that really work for you and work towards your goals. You see the tools available on this slide. You can learn more about each one of them. But I recommend to choose and to at least begin with the tools that are specifically interesting to the topics and to the analysis that you would want to do. As you get comfortable with using data collected by Google, you can also move forward and begin collecting your own real user monitoring data. This can be helpful if your site doesn't have enough traffic to appear in the Chrome User Experience Report, or if you would like to see more detailed and immediate feedback on your site's performance. By using a small but very important JavaScript library called webvitals.js, you can set up your own real user monitoring. This library will help you measure Web Vitals on real users in a way that accurately matches how they're collected by Chrome and reported in all of the Google tools that I've just talked about. This is an open source library, so I recommend that you click on the link below and check it out in GitHub. I'm sure many of you build sites on WordPress, the world's most popular CMS, which now powers more than 40% of sites on the internet. Scikit is Google's official plugin for WordPress, which includes some of the measurement tools we've discussed already, plus more in an easy-to-use dashboard directly in the WordPress admin. The Scikit plugin for WordPress collects the most relevant Google tools for your customers, the site owners, in one place. So let's take a look at them. First of all, Pagespeed Insights, a tool we've already talked about when talking about performance. It lets your customers understand website performance at a glance. Next, Google Analytics, also part of Scikit. It will show how users are interacting with a WordPress site your customers own. Search Console will monitor how a site is behaving on search and how users are discovering it. And AdSense Console will help them track monetization. There are also 2 additional tools inside Scikit: Tag Manager for managing marketing tags, and finally Google Optimize for setting up A/B tests with no code editing required at all. We built Scikit to save you time and help you build a wonderful customer experience. With Scikit, it is easier than ever to create and manage reports for your customers. You and your customers will be able to see relevant insights from across multiple Google products directly in one dashboard. Instead of copying data from multiple products to compile reports, you will be able to see all of the information you need and would like to provide to your customers in one easy-to-read dashboard. Scikit will enable you to help your customers understand and grow their presence with a WordPress site. The plugin will provide an easy-to-understand metrics. In the WordPress dashboard, you see a screenshot of it on the slide. And as you can see, there's no really hard to understand data. It's easy grasp, it's insights, and it's the information that is needed specifically for your customers to understand what's happening on their website. Let's look a bit closer at the main modules inside Scikit. The Pagespeed Insights module will let your customers see core vitals for their site in the field and in the lab directly from the Scikit interface. You can also plug in the Google Analytics Scikit module for them to let your customers see how people navigate their site once they're on it. You will be able to show your customers organic traffic for their site, which pages are most popular, and how many people opened each particular page. You can also install an open Search Console module inside Scikit to explore how many people saw and clicked on the website in Google search, which search queries they used, and what is the website's average search ranking. If your customers would like to monetize their site with ad placements, you will be able to help them by installing the AdSense module into Scikit, and it will automate ad placements and help track monetization. As you see, the most essential Google tools out there for website owners are all collected and combined into Scikit. So I say that seeing is believing, and so I invite you to install Scikit and look around. The WordPress Scikit plugin is absolutely free. It takes only a couple of minutes to install and begin using. And I'm going to leave this link with you to explore, to take a look, to try it out, and to bring value to your customers. Thank you so much. And with that, I will be handing it over back to Sal.
So like I promised, we're going to do a quick demo to help you find a way to find those resources that you're not using, identify them, and hopefully remove them. So I think a lot of us are familiar with Chrome development tools. Some of us are not. From any page, if you go and right click, you're going to go and see on the bottom, there's a little thing that says inspect. This works in incognito mode much, much better than it works in regular mode because of things like caching that might affect the way things run. So go to the page that you're working on, right click to get the menu, click on inspect, and then tools will pop up. So you're going to go and see a whole list of tools that are available. Up on top, you're going to see auditing tools, you're going to see Lighthouse, you're going to see performance tools, and a ton of other things. On the bottom, you're going to see something called coverage. It's going to be available in the same area where you're going to normally see the JavaScript console. So just click on that, activate coverage. At that point, you're going to still need to go and run your performance test. So you're going to go and click on the performance evaluation, have it load the page and do that wonderful little performance evaluation, and then it's going to go and give you that coverage graph on the bottom. Before it does that, though, you're going to go and see on the performance part, you're going to see all the standard things that will be happening during page load. You'll see when the LCP happens, when the FCP happens, when TTI happens, all those things will be measured out. That kind of stuff is interesting if you're going to dig deep into your page's structure. But we're probably looking for instead is this. The coverage information. Well, you can sort this out to just look at the CSS or at the JavaScript. So you're going to see this particular chart that pops up. You're going to notice there's a red part and a green part. All of the content there has been loaded by Chrome. Not all has actually been used. The part that's in green, well, that's stuff that's actually being used. The part that's red, well, Chrome spent some time working with it, but it's not actually benefiting you or your users. So you're going to go and look through those resources. Interesting thing about this is a live graph. So this is not just your page being loaded, but as you interact with your page, you're going to go and see the JavaScript and CSS proportions change a bit as you scroll up and down. What you're looking for are those resources that were loaded but never used. If you go and look at several different pages within your application, you might notice that there's a bunch of CSS files which, while they're included, they're never used. You might also see a bunch of JavaScript bundles, including third-party bundles, which maybe only 5 or 10% are actually being used. And 95%, while loaded and parsed, are never executed. So you can use this to go and find all of those bits of things which are there, which are legacy, which can be safely removed from your app to improve it. Thank you. And on behalf of everybody here at Google, I hope you found this presentation interesting and can start making use of everything you learned to help improve your users' web experience.